The question whether democracy promotion is a suitable strategy for peace intervention in the emerging multipolar order is actually really interesting right now, and I think this is also where our project is particularly well placed to now generate something interesting that hasn't really been said before. So what we can currently see is that democracy promotion used to be this, instrument that wasn't questioned for 3 decades, but at least in the past 10 years it has come under quite some not only scrutiny but real contestation. And we can now see that when we look at peace intervention sort of in a broader way, the way how the international peace architecture, so the UN system, would go about this, it's probably not suitable anymore. And this is simply because the international order has now changed in a way that this is no longer palatable to some of the members on the UN Security Council. So we can very clearly see that. But here the EU comes in, and the EU has always tried to eke out its sort of own corner. I think it sees itself still as a normative actor. Now we do have to question that since the migration crisis, since all these things that have happened in the past 10 years. And there I would say what's happening in the eastern neighborhood and in the southern neighborhood of the EU is in particular of interest here. So we can see that it's not only the neighborhood itself that has changed as a result of the Arab uprisings at first in the beginning of the decade, and then now the Ukraine war, but it's actually the EU itself as well that is currently in a process of changing. So we can see that there's now much more contestation at many of these things that the EU might have stood for or thought it stood for. The contestation is sometimes coming from the outside, that countries, for example, in the global south are saying, well, this is more rhetoric than we can actually see this happening in practice. So there's this kind of scrutiny coming in. But then there's also shifts of power within the EU, where we can see now, for example, as a result of the Ukraine war, that we can see maybe power shifting a bit more to the east within the EU, towards actors who, on the one hand, are not happy anymore with this transactional way of politics, where it's France and Germany kind of making pacts and then sort of dishing out enough money to make this sort of the basis of consensus in the wider EU. We can see now many of the Eastern European countries coming forward and saying, well, actually, we see things very differently. We are not entirely sure about democracy promotion, the way how you see this as a conditionality, for example. Should this actually go forward? Should this be applied also to EU member countries? So we see some backsliding within the EU itself, in Hungary and Poland, for example, and then some pushing back as a result of this. So we have all these kind of tectonic plates that are currently shifting. So when it comes to the question, is it now suitable? I would say, well, it's probably not suitable anymore in the way how the EU has gone about this before, with a very fixed idea of what democracy is and how it can be promoted. I think the EU starts understanding this, at least we can see in some of the documents that are coming out, that the rhetoric is now shifting in terms of what kind of actors they want to work with. It's maybe not NGOs anymore only, but it might even be some social movements and other actors as well. But also in the idea of democracy promotion being completely uncontested, that is definitely no longer the case. From a peace and conflict studies perspective, we would say it's still necessary to do something about political participation, because the concept of peace cannot be divorced from a way of creating consensus in society, whether that's through standard models of democracy or other ways of creating consensus. That's a different kind of question, but there definitely needs to be political participation.